Councilmember O'Neill.
Here.
Councilmember Beer.
Here.
Councilmember Beckmeyer.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Martin.
Here.
Mayor Vaterlaust.
Here. And we'll do salute to the flag led by Councilmember Beer.
Sorry.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America, and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're starting tonight with a budget study session for fiscal year 2019 to 20, and we have a narrative budget report. May we have the staff, please?
Thank you, Mayor Vaterlaus and council members. Kevin Woodhouse, City Manager. Pleased to kick off this year's budget development process for the fiscal year 1920 budget with this narrative session. And I have up here as well Assistant City Manager Lorenzo Hines to help out with this. And this is putting together the budget this year. I'll go through some of the steps and where we are in the process, but it's definitely a executive team-wide effort. Most of the department directors are here in case there are questions that specifically relate to their departments. The outline for the presentation that we'll run through is I'll touch on the purpose of the narrative budget and then how that fits into the budget development schedule, and then go over some background about mainly the general fund financial condition. And then we'll dive into the 10 specific budget strategies that are to be discussed tonight in this study session. And concerning those strategies, the council's not voting on them, but the importance of it is to have input from council members and get a sense of the direction related to those budget strategies, because then we turn around and take those strategies in developing the recommended budget, bringing it back to the City Council. Concerning the narrative budget purpose, we want to look and review revenue and expenditure trends, just the general financial context for the city currently and projected for upcoming years, specifically discuss the budget strategies, and as I mentioned, the goal of this study session is guidance to us to develop the proposed fiscal year 1920 budget. This table reflects the various key milestones in the budget development process. We began really back in late February with the long-term financial forecast plan, presenting that to the council, as well as the fiscal year 18-19 mid-year budget adjustments. As you're aware, and the other item on the agenda tonight relates to council goals, we held the goal-setting session on March 9th, identified council priorities, and that's really a budgetary step because it really informs the budget that we need to do and the priorities for the city's finances. Beginning in early March and extending, through late April, as I mentioned, the departments have really been working on their detailed budgets and then presenting those to the city manager's office, as well as working on the fee schedule and the CIP. And that brings us to tonight's narrative budget report, as well as the council goals adoption. May 6th, one of the steps in the budget process is that the CIP goes before the Planning Commission.
Capital Improvement Program?
Sorry, yes, thank you very much. The Capital Improvement Program goes to the Planning Commission really for a determination that the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, call that the CIP henceforth, is consistent with zoning. May 7th is Budget Study Session Part 2, and as well as a presentation regarding the draft fee schedule. Then we dive into department-specific budget presentations.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes.
About the CIP to Planning Commission, is that also PB&R CIP?
The CIP includes all the capital projects for all of the departments.
So anything that the PB&R would have submitted?
Right.
Yeah, okay. And it doesn't go to PB&R, right?
I'm sorry?
It doesn't go to PBR, right, the commission?
No.
Okay.
It's just a determination by the plan. They don't weigh in on this, on really the substance of the projects in the capital program. They just make a consistency determination with zoning.
Okay, thanks.
Planning Director Weremeister is here if we want to dive more into the specifics of that. At May 13th, we really dive into the department-specific budgets, so we're gradually getting more and more detailed here. Continue with the departments on May 28th, and then the budget public hearings are scheduled for June 10th, and then formal adoption of the budget on June 24th. So diving a little bit now into the general fund financial condition, these tables aren't new to the City Council. Versions of them were presented at the March 9th goal-setting session. And what these basic tables show are the past 5 years of revenue growth for the city and the past 5 years of expenditure growth. And the important point to make in comparing these numbers, and these numbers are based on the comprehensive annual financial report numbers, so the actual numbers, not the budgeted numbers in each of those years. And the kind of important point related to the city's financial condition is while we have stable tax revenues, there's only minimal growth, and expenditure growth is outpacing revenue growth. So for revenue growth, we have an average over the last 4 years of about 4.4% growth, and for expenditures, about 5.6% of growth. What that then translates to, going back to the financial forecast that was presented to the council back in February, is a scenario of a structural deficit forecast for the city. And while each year we will bring to the council a balanced budget recommended for consideration, our challenges each year are steepening because the gap between our expenditures and our revenues is increasing. A couple important points regarding this chart that I'd like to make. Number one, we are essentially overdue for a new recession, and while we'll keep our fingers crossed that maybe we'll continue to remain overdue for a recession, they typically cycle in the 8 to 10 years, every 8 to 10 years, and this forecast doesn't factor in its numbers a recession concerning revenue growth. But you'll see later that some of the budget strategies being recommended are prudent in the sense of preparing for the eventuality of a recession. Another important point to keep in mind, and I know the council is aware of this, is just the difference between one-time monies and ongoing monies. And the analogy used is you wouldn't want to pay your mortgage or your rent by tapping into your savings account because you can't pay for it with your ongoing salary because eventually your savings account would run out and that's a bad situation to be in. So when we're looking at the budget, we draw a distinction between one-time revenues and ongoing revenues, and we try to structurally, that's what the term structural means, is the ongoing revenues are exceeding the ongoing expenses. That's what you strive for. It's important to keep that in mind as some of the budget strategies are based on that premise.
It'll go away.
These forecasts also, and this is the same as last year, do not include revenue forecasts related to the cannabis business program. Those revenues still remain unknown. They're starting to trickle in as the retail stores are permitted and open, and there's a specific budget strategy that relates to cannabis revenues that I'll explain more in a little bit. The forecasts also do not factor in other economic development efforts, such as other hotel projects that might, be in the pipeline or in the future we anticipate having, because those aren't a reality at this point in time. So it wouldn't be accurate to really factor those in. And the expenditures reflected here only include employee salary benefit increases through 2021, because beyond that, the MOUs with the employee groups don't extend, so we don't know. So having, I suppose we could pause here and see if there's any questions related to the financial context before we dive into the specific budget strategies. Okay, I'll carry on. There are 10 budget strategies, and I'll present each one in brief. As I mentioned, the strategies primarily relate to use of one-time funding, therefore not exacerbating the structural deficit that we're faced with. But a couple of the strategies are strategies to help structurally balance the budget. So they do pertain to ongoing revenues. This discussion tonight is not really in detail about the numbers, the monies related to these strategies. It's higher level than that, and on May 7th is when we start really diving into the specific numbers. So the first strategy, and again, this is one that is continuing from last year. The city established reserve policies, which we now call fund balance commitments. We'll call those the FBC, fund balance commitments, FBC. We had passed reserve policies years ago, but didn't really begin funding those reserves until last year. And the general fund balance commitment has a goal of 10% of general fund expenditures. And from the money that we funded in that reserve last year, we're currently at 4.9%. It's important to note that healthy, general fund reserves run more in the 15 to 25% range for most cities. So we have a modest goal related to our general fund FBC, but we want to work towards attaining that. The other FBC is related to compensated absences. This is money that we set aside for employee separations and retirements, for the vacation and other monies that they're owed at the point in time, because it's hard to predict when employees may retire or leave. So if you don't have money set aside to do that, it can become quite an impact to the department's budget. So we began setting aside compensated absences, FBC, last year, and we've spent the money that was set aside last year. And the goal for this next year that the policy dictates is 149,000. The formula that the policy dictates equals 149,000 for fiscal year 1920. And the third fund balance commitment relates to facility maintenance and replacement. And the policy goal is to be, putting $100,000 per year. This is really a pay-as-you-go fund to help us with facility needs in the future, relocation of city facilities, to have some seed money for activities that may be necessary. So last year we began funding these FBCs, and generally the recommendation is just to, without being specific about numbers until later, to continue with one-time monies to fund these FBCs.
Question, so the facility maintenance and replacement FBC, is that a fund that you could see a balance being carried over every year, or it will be zeroed out and then just funded again the next year?
No, all of these reserves are carried over. So they're savings accounts, if you will, for that designated purpose. So the facilities, last year we put 150,000 in it, so that 150,000 is there when we need to spend that.
And is there parameters as to facility maintenance and replacement? Maintenance could be pretty broad, as to when this money's used versus just you buy a new faucet.
Right, so it's more for maintenance. It's more if we have an unexpected large maintenance incident, let's say, or
A roof
repair.
replacement or something like that?
A storm, tree falls on a roof, and it's an expensive, that kind of thing, because you'll see that one of the strategies of the 10 strategies recommended is to designate some one-time monies for ongoing facility maintenance that we know is needed now. And we did that same thing last year.
Now, this is the first year we've come out with the fund balance commitments. I think it's great that these three things are being done. I'm just wondering if somebody, resident looks on the web, if they're going to know what a fund balance commitment is. And I just, because I want to try to be obviously ease of understanding for the public. So I don't know if you can come up with a better or just keep using that. I just,
Yeah. I'll turn to ACM Hines to elaborate, but,
ACM, Assistant City Manager, yeah, okay. See what I just said, FBC, CIP, the ACM?
Our
Okay.
ACM will elaborate on the FBCs.
Okay.
Sorry.
Will this include the CIPs? No.
Yeah. But, typically and historically, these have been called reserves. And it was a recommendation of our auditor, correct, that we kind of move away from use of that terminology and call them fund balance commitments.
Yes, and essentially they are reserves, Assistant City Manager Lorenzo Hines, and essentially they are reserves that sit within the general fund. And so in the staff report that you have before you, you'll see an undesignated cash balance within the general fund, and that cash balance is sort of sans all of these other reserves that sit there. These reserves are necessary for, they basically act as contingencies for emergencies. And to not have them there wouldn't be prudent, let's just put it that way. As far as the terminology is concerned, we'll be happy to label it in a way that the auditors would prefer to label it, but we will put the sort of the everyday language in parentheses out to the side so folks can understand what's going on.
I fully support what you're doing. I don't want you to think I'm being critical of that.
we're
and
aware of
stuff.
that.
I just was, would the public understand what a fund balance commitment is,
Understood.
That's the only thing I have. Thank you.
Yeah, we can work to make sure that is clear and
I
transparent.
don't have any ideas either, so.
Okay, moving on to the next strategies.
I thought I heard another question.
Was there another question? No.
The only thing is, just to that point, on the website, you can implement a hover tool. So when you put FCB, when you hover over it, it'll spell out the full thing. Just an IT thing.
All right.
We'll see what the budget says.
We'll see what the IT guy did.
We have consistently strived to make our website as transparent as possible, so we will take that under consideration, as well as any other measures that make it easier for the public to understand everything that's on there.
So moving on to the second strategy, and again, this is a continuation of a strategy from previous years, which relates to the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund, ERAF, which are monies that we receive each year but not guaranteed every year. And last year, the council authorized a pre-allocation formula for the ERAF funds that would provide and designate, kind of pre-allocate funding for the Pacifica Resource Center, for the Pacific Beach Coalition, and then the balance of ERAF would go to our disaster accounting fund. And the last year, as shown on the slide, 1.8 million went to the disaster accounting fund, 83,000 to the Resource Center, 5,000 to the Beach Coalition, and then also we had vehicle replacement needs last year, and 530,000 went to those vehicle replacements. The difference for this year is we've been told that we're due a supplemental ERAF payment in August, and that has to do with the county adjusting its allocation timings, and that's a unexpected, unanticipated payment of ERAF in August, and then in January, February, which is our normal time to receive the annual ERAF payment, we don't know that amount, but it's estimated to be lower than the normal ERAF payments. So concerning this change, there's an opportunity to apply the August 2019 one-time ERAF supplemental payment to priority projects in the budget, these budget strategies I'm talking about, one-time funding. And then with the 2020 annual ERAF allocation to continue the pre-allocation formula that the council designated.
Now, the supplemental August 2019, we've never gotten two ERAF checks in a year. So is this a one-time second check, or does this probability or possibility of we're going to start getting ERAF twice a year?
I would just consider it a one-time. As City Manager Woodhouse mentioned, the county has revised their allocation formula, and this allocation and this particular action is still in flux. So I have documentation indicating we're getting a payment in August, and we're getting a payment in January that is not known yet. As far as anything beyond January, I don't have any more information, and we just have to stay tuned and see what the county provides.
Mary?
And so with the pre-allocation, is there always going to be money set aside for the vehicle replacement? Is that like a typical?
No, the vehicle replacement isn't part of the pre-allocation
Okay.
formula. That was a
Okay.
one-time difference. Actually, last year, part of that was we received a much higher payment than the historical average. I believe instead of 1.7 to 1.9, it was 2.45 million.
Right.
And so we had an opportunity to use that excess to fund the priority vehicle replacements.
So I have a question. I just want to make sure I understood what you said a minute ago about your thinking on this 1.1 million second payment. I think what I heard you say is apply that to the priority areas in this document, and then for the pre-allocations, take those out of the January or allotment of ERAF.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to,
Hold on.
Oh, yes.
Deirdre?
So just for the public's knowledge, the prioritized projects that you're talking about, the first level priorities, right?
what I'm saying here with the 1.1
Yeah.
million one-time funds is that not the council priority projects in goal setting, but, I mean, some of those.
Yeah.
But also these budget strategies that use one-time funding, so achieving reserve policy balances, the totality of the one-time money between these budget strategies, as well as funding the 300-something thousand related to the council priority projects
That isn't
is what
clear
this
to
would be
me.
used for.
Right.
Just by that statement, I referred right to the priority one, prioritized projects, and thank you for clarifying that, but I just want to make sure for the general public, then what you're recommending is to make sure that we fund the slide before this, that we fill up our fund balance commitments as much as possible, start, beginning with that 1.1, compensated absences and facility maintenance, right? That's the first, with that 1.1, you're saying that's your suggestion?
Well, I'm not suggesting at this point in time that we're ordering or prioritizing how we use that one-time money, because when we come back on May 7th, May 7th with the next budget study session, we'll be talking numbers and how we take, the amount of one-time money we have available and how we disperse it to try to achieve as best as possible all of these strategies and goals.
So,
Does that make sense?
sort of, except the statement is a little bit misleading with that clarification. Apply the August to, one-time ERAF to priority projects. So priority budget strategies
Yes.
should be
yes,
added to that.
Yeah. I think
Right?
that's a good clarification.
Okay.
That
Okay, that makes more sense.
Makes more
That's all.
sense.
I just got a little confused. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I think Deirdre clarified it for me, thanks.
Okay, now, in looking at the one-time ERAF supplemental payments, is going towards the 4 million that over the years at one point was transferred from different funds to cover immediate problems? Am I correct? Because you said it was going to be replacing funds.
So, we've in the past had funds, and you referred to it as the 4 million. There were loans that were made between Fund 9 and Fund 22. They
Right.
couldn't be paid back. So that's part of dollars that are driving Fund 22 into a deficit. So that's part of the figure, and it's not quite 4 million. And then there were dollars that were reflected in Fund 38, the disaster accounting fund, where that was in a deficit. And so that was also a sizable amount of dollars. However, we merged Fund 30 into Fund 38. I'm sorry, we merged the former ERAF fund into the disaster accounting fund. And so most of that deficit has been addressed, or I can't tell you to what extent, but I'll just say that part of those funds are being used to address that deficit. And so is that, I'm just trying to make sure I
Basically,
understand.
what is the remaining amount of the money that was taken out of the two funds? The disaster relief fund that was running a deficit.
Right.
And then when we merged the ERAF. And I know I'm just asking you right now that,
Right. And we
okay.
can, and when we present those funds, we'll come back to you with a sort of a reconciliation of where Fund 38 is now, post-merger, between Fund 30 and Fund 38. The other things that we have to consider is, Fund 38 was essentially allowing us to deal with seawall issues, erosion issues, apartments sliding off mountainside issues that they didn't quite slide off, but, we were dealing with the specter of that. Having to take over those apartment complexes and essentially raise the building. And we had to do that with city funds. And that's what Fund 38 was used for. At the same time, as ERAF flowed into the city, we were using dollars from Fund 30 for these kinds of projects as well. And so it was decided last year, and I'm just restating for the public, it was decided last year that we would merge Fund 30, the ERAF, and Fund 38, the disaster accounting fund, because essentially we were using the ERAF dollars and Fund $30 for essentially what we were paying for in Fund 38. And it made sense.
Yeah, you simplified the accounting procedures
Yes.
for everybody, so it was more black and white. But I was just curious if there was still an outstanding balance from that.
We'll have to look at that, and that's part of the presentation you'll get over the next month.
And another thing is, we still have some, a balance owed to the wastewater treatment fund from when we used it to balance out the pension obligation bonds.
And when we get to the last budget strategy, we'll talk about that.
Okay, okay.
Your clairvoyance is showing, yes.
You're ahead of me.
Okay. I'll probably have a question.
Any other questions on ERAF, or?
I have a question. What's Fund 22?
Fund 22 is our capital projects fund.
Thank you. And 9?
Fund 9 is our streets fund.
Thank you.
Could you give us a menu of all the funds and what their names are?
Yes, yes. When we, we'll provide that to you. But I would like the public to know that with each published budget, there is a section called the All Funds section. And it contains a listing of all of the funds as well as their utilization and a little bit about their origins. So we'll be happy to provide that to you.
The spy decoder ring.
Okay. The next budget strategy relates to the streets program and paving of streets. The recommendation is that we augment the streets program with additional one-time revenues to be used for additional paving projects. We did that in fiscal year 18-19, and I'd recommend to continue doing that into 19-20 so we can continue that forward momentum on improving our streets. As the council is aware, from the last council meeting, we have SB1 funds that have been designated for a half-mile section of Monterey for fiscal year 19-20 to be repaved. And we'll begin receiving Measure W funding, which is the countywide half-cent sales tax that is designated for streets improvement projects. We'll begin receiving that in the fall. We'll apply that to additional paving. And then there's the potential, and we don't know the number, and would come back, if the council's supportive of this strategy, would come back with ideas about how to augment those two tax sources with additional one-time funds to do even more paving. Last year, on top of the SB1 funding, we had identified an additional $720,000 to bring the total to about $1.3 million that was used for the Lindemar paving and Oceana paving projects this year. So it's a continuation again of that same strategy.
Are we considering Measure W just basically a kind of annual payment similar to ERAF? Or are we actually considered, because I mean, the Measure W funding will vary every year, correct?
Right, well,
So-
it's different from ERAF because it will be an
Right.
ongoing revenue source.
So we're looking at it as ongoing revenue
Right.
and planning the budget accordingly then?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we'll be reporting back when we get in the specifics of the paving program. Actually, this was a question that came out of Monday night's meeting is, what are the specific designations or uses for Measure W money? So we'll report on those specifics, but they are intended for streets projects.
Kevin, it's a portion of them that's dedicated to the street repair programs, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Okay.
A whole bunch of the Measure W money is being used countywide for major transit projects and freeway infrastructure projects. I mean, that's where the bulk of it is going, and kind of the smallest bucket is being divvied out to cities and towns for their local use for streets. Moving on then to the cannabis business program revenues. This recommendation is a little bit different, this strategy being recommended is a little bit different than last year. At this time last year, we were in the midst of launching the program. There were no shops open, and we were just in the midst of the whole permitting process. This year, we know for certain that the stores will be open. One is open. 4 total are permitted locally. 2 of those still have to get their state permit, and then there's 2 others that still have to go through the local permitting process. But it still remains the case with cannabis in Pacifica, cannabis businesses in Pacifica, as well as statewide, that it's an uncertain revenue stream. There's changing regional market forces, there's unknowns about the black market, and there's unknowns about the longevity of the businesses and the timing and turnover of businesses. And last year, the recommendation was that we really need a couple years of experience with a Pacifica-specific revenue stream from these sources from which to make informed forecasts about that revenue stream before we rely on it as an ongoing revenue source as opposed to a one-time source. So last year, the council endorsed that any revenues from cannabis businesses that come in, we treat as one-time monies. And so given that we're further along in this process and knowing that we have structural budget challenges, the recommendation this year, and the percentages are yet to be determined, is that we really regard a minority percentage of the cannabis program revenues as ongoing revenues when we're building the budget, and a majority of the revenues as one-time revenues. And, for example, and again, the specific percentages we can determine, but if we conservatively say, okay, 1/3 of our projected revenues we're going to receive, we can build in as ongoing revenues, and 2/3 would be as one-time revenues.
A question now, I know when we review the fees at whatever date that is in the future, are we also going to be looking then at the fees we charge for the initial licensing? Because I know we were surprised at how intensive and expensive that was, that not necessarily the fees that we were charging were not necessarily covering the cost. Will
Correct.
those fees be looked at in this budget study session next month?
Yeah, on May 7th, we'll be presenting the draft fee proposal, and there'll be detailed information about how much money the city has spent on the cannabis business program thus far, and what the fees are, and what recommendations for application fees as well as license renewal fees should be moving forward in the program.
And a question for the city attorney. Okay, when the voters voted the tax on cannabis, is that a ceiling, and can we lower that if we want to, or is it hard there at whatever, I forget the percentage, 6%? Could we lower that, or is it a hard 6? And then at some point, could we raise it back to the 6?
My recollection is that it could be lowered, yes.
Okay, because I know one of the reasons from some research or reading I've been doing is that there's been so much tax between the state and locals and everything that we're not competitive with, Guido on the corner. So, so we're losing out tax revenue. So I was just wondering if that, if that was an option we could consider at some point. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think that's why we made it 6 instead of some of the cities are 10 or 12, so
Right, but
there was a reason for the 6.
Right, but we could at some point, if, it's a discussion point, and I just wanted to get the information.
The other thing that the ordinance allows is after 2 years to raise the tax up to 10%. Now, statewide, there's lots of recommendations and experience that say that the 5 to 6% is a safe ground, and 10%. I think some jurisdictions, perhaps Sacramento or others, were maybe at 10%, and they've started to lower it because of that precise concern.
And I'm just double checking, so I'll let you know if my answer needs to be changed.
Oh, thank you, Denise.
Okay, if there's no more questions about the cannabis business program revenues, budget strategy, moving on to strategy 5. So last year, there was a budget strategy that related to limited term staffing related to some heavy lift projects that the planning department was undertaking, such as the general plan update, local coastal plan, and the Sharp Park specific plan, as well as back then the quarry site specific plan. And limited term staffing is a tool that's available, basically a contract employee to work on a limited term project. And it's a way of utilizing one-time revenues to augment staff resources for priority projects. What we've seen over the course of this year with the amount of staff resources available in the planning department as well as in the city manager's office is that some projects like the climate action plan implementation or implementation of litter reduction strategies have been challenging. And this strategy relates to environmental sustainability, the litter reduction strategies, and implementation of the climate action plan is a council priority. And to give it the attention and the advancement that it needs as a council priority, it needs much more focused and in a way more specialized staff resource attention. So this is essentially saying that we look at the feasibility of using one-time funds for a limited term position to focus on those programs. In addition, and we'll be talking about this later during goals adoption, as part of the climate action plan implementation goal, the council has requested to review the possibility or feasibility of establishing a city climate action committee, and that's a step that takes significant staff resources as well to support such a committee. So this limited term role would be focused on that as well. Questions?
So for this budget strategy, the recommendation is for, during the budget study session, for us to come up with a dollar amount for the 2019-2020 year to dedicate to limited term staffing that would handle priorities such as climate action and litter reduction,
Correct.
right?
And without being able to speak to the specific dollar amount, that's what we would be evaluating, is what level of a position would be appropriate to focus on this type of work.
But upon adopting this as a budget strategy, we would be committing to setting aside at least some funds for that?
Well, again, let me go back. You make a great point, Councilmember Martin, in that tonight, we're not adopting anything. You're just providing guidance to staff. And these are sort of guidelines that we'll use in shaping budget recommendations to come back to you. And during the budget process, that's when you really make the decisions about these. Does that make sense?
Sure it does. So would this strategy then call out a dollar amount for climate action plan and call out a dollar amount for litter reduction strategy? Or would it just set aside, and I guess Lorenzo is probably better to answer the question, for just the staffing piece? And planning can use it at their discretion?
Right. And so this, again, well, let me back up.
Because it sort of prioritizes depending on the amount of money that it prioritizes it for you. See what I'm saying?
Right, and what this...
Setting aside $1,000 is
Sure.
different than setting aside 100,000.
So this strategy is recommending that there be a limited-term staff person, and the dollar amount tied to hiring that limited-time staff person we need to come back with. But, and that staff person is focused on these types of environmental sustainability programs, the climate action plan, litter strategies. There could be other things that come up as well that fall under that council goal.
Okay.
So the priority focus of this staff person is on those types of environmental sustainability program. And I should mention, this strategy is precisely what I did when what I implemented when I was working for the city of Mountain View, when I was sort of the sustainability de facto coordinator, and it got to a point where there was so much going on that we needed to hire a sustainability coordinator. That's what we did. And then I also implemented this strategy when I was with the Mid-Penn Regional Open Space District. Same thing in dealing with the climate action plan. It just gets so detailed and requires some specialty knowledge and just attention, detailed attention. As you may remember, I got my start in solid waste and recycling. So I know from experience that designing litter reduction pilot programs is a very time-consuming endeavor to do it right. And so, again, it requires that focus and, someone that builds those skills or already has those skills to focus on to implement. And that's what our staff resourcing rubric currently struggles with we are making forward progress and momentum on all these efforts, but we struggle with that.
So we're just saying, I'm sorry, just to clarify, I don't mean to keep going on with this, but it would be one, or we don't know yet? It would be one limited-term staff person? We don't know yet.
Yes, I fully anticipate that to get a qualified and competent, talented person, one staff person on a limited term
And it would be for
would
the
cost a
fiscal
lot
year?
of money, and that's what we need to look at.
And it would be for the fiscal year?
It'd be for one year, 2 years. It would be a year-by-year situation, though.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Mary?
And so does this strategy fall under the priority budget strategies that we were talking about before? Because you're talking about the 1.1 million from the ERAF funds, would this possibly fall under that as well?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
That one-time money could be used, part of that could be used for this strategy.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
Are you? You going to say?
No.
Oh. I think it also, if we're going to have environmental sustainability and garbage collection, I think we may have a fiscal sustainability person to look at the many issues we have in terms of when projects are approved, non-revenue producing businesses are going into those buildings. Because we're going to need to look at the possibility of, I discussed it with planning earlier this week, that we will approve something, let's say C1, okay? And a business that qualifies as a C1 goes in there, but they are a service business that does not provide us any revenue. And I would like to have a fiscal sustainability person in that to help the planning department do the proper changes in the zoning code to do that. And I was told that it would be best to do that through the general plan, but I would like to see if we can have a fiscal sustainability person in the budget also with one-time money, limited term.
Let me make a note. Generally, what I would say about that is between myself and Assistant City Manager Hines and our Economic Development Manager, we comprise that fiscal sustainability perspective because it's a priority area that we focus on. And I've not heard of specific position called a fiscal sustainability coordinator.
Well,
we can look at it. And
I'm looking at somebody that can go in. I don't want to bring up specific addresses because there's kind of, privacy issues and stuff with different negotiations going on and stuff. But there are, buildings that the city had hoped a revenue producing business would be in there, and now a non-revenue producing business is going in there, or minimal revenue producing business is going in there. Okay.
Question, so are you referring to like a retail operation that would generate sales tax revenue?
Yes, retail, restaurants, something like that. Rockaway, specifically when it was built, was supposed to have visitor serving entities there. It is not getting visitor serving entities. And if that's a problem that we need to address through zoning codes, zoning regulations, or whatever, I would like someone that could be the guy, the goalie, the guy to get that over, that we can actually start doing that, to look at those specific instances.
Okay.
I'm clear?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay.
Okay, move on.
The strategy number 6 is a continuation of a strategy from last year, which relates to facility and information services and technology infrastructure improvements. Both of these, one is technology infrastructure and the other is physical infrastructure. Both have needs there, numerous facility, safety, function, and appearance improvements necessary, as well as technology infrastructure improvements. So the recommendation here is to approve one-time funding in the budget to continue priority improvements to city offices, such as interior painting, carpeting, and other safety and ADA improvements, as well as to continue priority IST program improvements.
Question. Now, we are in the middle of doing a facility study, correct, to see the status. And I mean, I would think, given the condition, and I use City Hall as the example, is it worth doing ADA improvements to a building that's really not, sustainable or worth keeping type of thing? That's what my concern is.
Sure.
And would some of this money be one-time funding? Because I see everything here is one-time funding, and I don't know, that big check must be in the mail or something. But, I'm just concerned about spending a lot of money on buildings that really should probably be considered for destruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the ADA improvements are
Mandated.
The Americans with Disability Act improvements are triggered by other improvement mechanisms, and triggered by lawsuits against the city. So some of the improvements that we've made at the Civic Center are triggered by settlements. Mm-hmm. And that's about the limitation. The other improvements are really focused on the other safety features, as well as appearance cosmetic features, and being completely cognizant of how much we spend on that relative to the length of life of that facility. We're looking at this year assessing facility needs. It's on the radar to continue look at options, but there's nothing concrete that we have in place or timeline in place. So we know we're going to be at the Civic Center for a while, and the small dollars, relatively small dollars being recommended, that will be recommended as part of these facility improvements, would be focused on those. Last year, it was, I believe, $150,000 that was put towards this.
Do we have an estimate as to when the facility study will be done?
There's a couple different components to it. There's an old study that we're looking at to update, and that will be sometime during this fiscal year. I think we have a meeting coming up in a couple weeks, actually, to begin
You're talking
looking at that.
1920 fiscal year?
Yes,
Okay.
and then the other component to that, as I've mentioned previously, we currently have an assessment of the Public Works Department occurring, and that is looking at public works facilities as well. At a high level, not in a very detailed, but these all add up to pieces that allow us to examine the sort of landscape and future of our facilities. Okay?
Information technology? Are we done with that item now?
Oh, if there's questions?
Do you have any of those? Okay.
Moving on then to strategy 7 relates to parks, beaches, and recreation staffing. The 2 points related to this is that PB&R has two funding sources, the Roy Davies Trust Fund, and this year a significant bequest to senior services, which serve as a one-time funding source for designated uses within senior services and PB&R. So part of the recommendation is to continue to tap into those sources as appropriate and as they're designated for programs, and not to tap into the general fund for these types of programs. The other half of this is, as you've heard, the child care program is experiencing significant increases in demand. The waiting lists are deeper than they ever have been. And in order to increase child care capacity, that carries with it increases in teachers to provide that. And PB&R staff and Director Perez are looking at a strategy to increase child care services, increase the number of slots that we serve in a fiscally sustainable way, and we'll be bringing details back to the council regarding that.
Are these waiting lists preschool or school age?
I will turn to Director Perez concerning that. My guess is that they're potentially both.
Okay, and then we're looking to maybe increasing site locations. I'll ask the questions as you go. At the school sites, on-site daycares?
Good evening, Michael Perez, Director for Parks, Beach, and Recreation. The first question is yes, it's both school age and preschool waiting lists. Probably more for the school age, and we have more school age children. And what was the second question?
Are they on-site at the schools, facilities you're looking at expanding or doing something with?
Yes.
Off-site
Yes,
or-
but well, it involves both. So we have childcare at 4 school sites, and we have 2 facilities that we own. And at the 2 facilities we own, that's where we have preschool. And we have preschool and school age at some of the school sites. So some of it will involve a proposal of moving some things around. Other would be proposing more staffing, and also on top of full-time staffing, there'd be some part-time, very targeted, aggressive recruitment for part-time staff members as well.
Now, is this the subsidized daycare program or after-school program, or is it full charge, or, you know what I mean, full price?
We have waiting lists for both. I can't tell you how many's on either.
No, I'm
Usually
not
when right, and we try to make a priority if there's someone that qualifies for subsidized to get them in. If they're eligible and we can get them in, we'll do that. But there's a lot of full cost waiting on there.
So it's a mixture of both. Is the subsidized funding in any danger given the current climate of, this era?
No.
So it's not federal money, it's state, or mixture of both?
We're over fulfilling our contract. So we're going to get the funding for the children that we serve. So we have no indication of not receiving any of that funding.
Okay, thank you.
Wait. The Senior Services Fund is just for senior services. Do you have any ideas of what you would like to move forward with those funds?
There are some ideas, as you know, and also Councilmember Beer has been part of the task force for the age-friendly cities, and they have done some focus groups and have talked about some things that might be worth focusing on for that. We are not coming forward with a proposal yet or any project or program just yet, but I can see something happening in the near future. But those funds are solely for the senior.
Right.
Is that capital only, or can it be used for ongoing costs for seniors?
It cannot be used for existing programs or staff's salaries and wages unless for staff salaries and wages that it's an expansion of an existing program. So if we expand a program or we do a new program, it could fund for that. And there isn't a restriction that I'm aware of on a capital project, but it is, the words
Senior.
are solely for seniors.
So with the library back at Sanchez, there is potential there to use this money in a capital way to expand a senior program back there then, right? If we go forward with the automated library and part of it becomes PBNR, you could conceivably expand some senior services back there, given there's the 2 senior housing facilities.
Conceivably, yes, and I don't know what that amount of money would be and whether that would be prudent.
Oh, I know there's no promises, but
Yeah,
it's...
right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're probably not going to, patch the side of a building with the money, but there's probably examples of things that we can do. So right now, we're still trying to figure it out. We still haven't gotten all the money actually yet. It's about 1.9 million, and we had, I think, 1.1 million check recently, or $1 million check, something like that. So.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Deirdre?
The only thing I would say is, while you're talking about salaries and increasing the expanding programs, I'm sure you're aware of the wage disparity and cost of living around here. It hits home personally because my daughter's first-year soccer coach had to move out because he couldn't afford it, and now they can't get swim coaches because also they can't afford it to live here. So to have to save yourself from having to come back to ask for increased salary, you might just want to think about going up a little bit higher if and when you decide to expand those programs and increase salaries just a little bit to accommodate for that disparity.
So the full-time staff salaries are set by the union, and so we have the ranges, and we are not going to be proposing any non-existing, positions, or what I say, like, there's not going to be a new position that's made up just for this. It would be an existing one that would fall in a category that already has a wage, and so we'd be bound by whatever that is. And in terms of the part-timers, we have been looking at that for a long time, and we're working with HR to do a comprehensive salary survey for the part-timers too as well. But there's an experience of part-times all over the county, all over the country. There's everybody's having a problem hiring right now.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm also concerned about that limited term position too, because I see them all over the place, but I don't see them being filled. So just a thought. Thanks, Mike.
Sure, thank you.
And Sue, as the task force continues its work, so we're meeting next week, then there's going to be more information about what's coming out of that, and then you'll have a clearer picture about what's coming. So.
Thank you. Okay, on to the next.
Sure. The next strategy relates to pension obligation financials, and as the council is aware, pension obligations are a continuing strain on our finances, with CalPERS decreasing its discount rate and the city faced with increases annually in the range of $800,000, 800 or 900? 800,000 citywide annually is exacerbating our structural deficit. One of the tools that's available is Internal Revenue Code Section 115, to set up Section 115 trust, and then to begin funding that trust with one-time funds that may be available. And that is a tool that helps manage short-term costs and long-term pension liabilities. So we want to look at least establishing that trust and begin funding it as possible, as feasible.
Quick question. What's an example of a short-term cost?
Short-term costs would be the premium that we pay for the unfunded liability in July of every year.
Okay.
And I don't really know what how the mechanism will work, where we'll offset that with the 115. But the 115 is there as a vehicle to help offset pension cost.
Okay.
And so be they short-term or long-term, they're there as a hedge against those costs.
Okay, and you'll give us a little more detail on the 115 once you have it?
We'll be coming forward before council with a report, not only on the pension obligation, the financial strategies with the Section 115 trust, but there is a report that council directed us to provide during the budget season back in December 2018 that allows us to fulfill the requirements of the grand jury. Their report that was issued early last year. And so we'll be discussing other strategies per that report, but it will culminate in a discussion and recommendations regarding the 115.
And that will be during the budget cycle, or?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
From what I've read about, and I went to a couple of workshops on the Section 115 trust, I think the biggest issue is the funding, because basically all it does is help you level out the payments. Let's say you put in $1 million, okay, and your pension obligation is $100,000. You would just withdraw the $100,000 every year out of that $1 million. So your general fund would be remaining intact, but then unless you fund it again, your $1 million, it's gone in 10 years. And that's the issue most cities are facing with the 115 trust, is the finite amount of money people have to actually put in the trust. So if we fund the
Insurance.
so if we fund the 115 trust, then we might not be able to fund limited term positions or, the other one-time funding sources that we've done, but from a long-term cash flow basis, it would help us. Okay, so no, we can't do loaves and fishes here.
So this strategy may actually require us to make a payment of a big payment, right?
A one-time big deposit in the savings account, yeah.
Right. Well, this would require some consideration of providing seed financing to this trust. Like every other financial instrument, we can only withdraw what we put in. And so we'll have to look at strategies for providing ongoing deposits into this trust, just so we'll have it there to address future pension costs.
Okay. Look forward to hearing more about it.
Okay. Oops. Go back. Strategy number 9 relates to one-time funding for the city council prioritized projects. And the goals adoption report later identifies the fiscal impact, which is in about, for this year, estimated in the $350,000 range, thereabouts. And, various numbers of those goals have specific dollar amounts, and that's what this goal is. This strategy is that we want to try to achieve funding the council priority projects.
Can I make a comment here? I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but can you clarify for me in the council prioritized projects and the budget between there, where's the G&A lie? Where's the just general and administrative, like just the cost of keeping lights on, as opposed to like, you got to come to work every day and have a job to do anyway. It's not going to come out right, but now we're setting aside money for people to come in and do their jobs.
Right.
I'm trying to compare it to something like I do every day. I have a project and I allocate my time to that project. So it's similar to that. I think I'm just kind of talking out loud here as it relates to G&A.
Well, I mean, that's our baseline budget, and a lot of the council projects, most of our costs are in staff resources with the expertise that staff has to carry out those projects. So a lot of the council projects are built on that, but then have additional one-time dollars that are necessary for consultant assistance or, specific, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, there might be, specific study that's necessary that costs an amount, or an actual capital item that costs an additional amount. So this is saying we want to identify the one-time dollars that are necessary to implement those specific costs related to the council projects. The baseline budget covers all of the staff resources and et cetera that we do. Did that kind of answer the?
Yeah, sort
your
of.
thought?
Did Lorenzo, did you have anything to add? You can just say, you're an idiot.
No, it's just from a purely corporate point of view, the G&A that you refer to is baked into our baseline budget. It's just categorized differently than you would see in a corporation. We have line items from salaries and wages, personnel benefits, pension expense, departmental expense, other service charges, intergovernmental charges, and capital outlay. Those are all categories that we use because we're government. But if you were to translate that into a sort of a private corporation, that's all of your G&A right there.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks for entertaining me.
Okay, and then the final budget strategy recommended relates to our interfund debt payment terms. And as Councilmember O'Neill alluded to earlier, dating back to 2014-15, the general fund had borrowed money from the wastewater treatment sewer charge fund for pension obligation bond debt payments, and established a payment schedule, a four-year payment schedule that back in 2014-15 began. We've made 2 of those payments, but the last 2 years are scheduled to be much higher than the previous years at approximately $900,000 a year. And since we know that we have some significant structural budget, general fund budget deficit challenges, one of the strategies could be to revisit that payment schedule, and this is under council authority to determine, and stretch the term out for how many years we have and what increments we're going to pay back that loan to the wastewater fund. Back when the 2014-15 loan occurred and the payment schedule was established, at that time, we didn't know the severity of the CalPERS obligation increases that were going to occur, the $800,000 citywide that we have to pay CalPERS. So it's a tool that's available, and maybe a prudent way to help with the structural part of our budget balancing this year. And I'll ask Assistant City Manager Hines if he has anything to add regarding that.
No, I don't. If council has any questions, we'll entertain those.
I have a comment. Okay. I was on the council back in 2014-15 when the council made the decision. The reason the council made that decision was the way the pension obligation bonds were structured. There was huge payments up front, and then the payments for this pension obligation bonds went lower. And we were going to have to basically eliminate like PBNR and major services if we didn't borrow from the wastewater treatment fund to make those higher payments. And then they were supposed to be going down afterwards, and that's what we've been paying on the POBs, the pension obligation bonds, okay? We had a lot of citizens coming up here saying, why are you raising my sewer rates 18% and then the city's borrowing this money? Well, you guys are never going to pay it. You never fulfill the obligations. You're just using this money that's supposed to be for wastewater to fund the pension obligation, to fund those payments. And I think for us, not to follow through with what the city at that point said we were going to do is breaking trust with the citizens, because we said we are going to do this. And I think this, many times this city has very little credibility with its citizens. We passed a fire assessment tax, then we closed a fire station. Okay, and I think we really, if before this is done, this needs to be very considered about the pact. We as fiduciary responsibilities for the city go. Now, this is something where you have the 115 trust. If we put the 1.1 million supplemental that's coming in, we put that in the trust, we can pull $500,000 out each year, which would then lower the two payments from what I'm reading here is $904,000 each year, correct? So that would we pull that, put the 1 million into the 115 trust, we pull 500 out, that reduces the payment to $400,000. So we're accomplishing the same goal in a different form that we have here, but I don't think we're breaking the trust we told the citizens that we would not when we went to borrow from the wastewater treatment fund. And I'll be honest with you, if this comes before me, I will vote no. I'm just saying right now, because we made a pact with the city, we raised people's sewer fees 18% a year. It made perfect sense to do it the way we did it. I mean, I don't know if it was communicated to the public that well, but if we don't follow this is what happened, and the reason the school district and the city had many issues regarding Sanchez School. The city said, we're going to make these payments to the school district. When it came time to make the payments, the city said, we can't afford it. And the school district had made plans to, use those to remodel some schools and fix some schools. So I don't think that this is not a way I would like to see this done. I'm being upfront. If we want to look at the 115, that's fine.
Well, no one knew in 2014 what the CalPERS payment obligations were going to be.
Correct.
So you may want to look at this in a different manner, because in those days, you didn't know this. You have new information now that could change how you make the payments. Just a suggestion.
Yep, I agree with that. And also, what you're suggesting would then be an alternate strategy, like
Correct.
all the packets we get that say council could follow this recommendation. Alternate action could be to blah, blah, blah. And it sounds like you're suggesting an alternate action with regard to the 1.1 million additional payment of ERAF. What I just heard you say
Yes.
is an alternate action that
Well,
doesn't
I'm throwing that in for
include-
discussion, yes.
that doesn't include funding these priority projects or the things that we've just spent some time going over.
If I may, the reason that this strategy is before you is, as the mayor mentioned, there were financial issues that we could not anticipate happening now, back in 2014-15. And so we, as a city, are addressing those issues with a certain level of flexibility. And S&P gives us these high bond ratings because of our ability to adjust and to be flexible. So this particular strategy will come before you. Now, regarding the relationship between wastewater and its ratepayers, the city's going to pay the dollars back. There's no, we don't have the money. This is an obligation that exists between two funds, the general fund and the wastewater funds. So that's the relationship right there. And so these dollars are owed and they will be paid back. What we're putting before you is that, is it possible we can stretch the payback out beyond the 2 years? But with interest, so the wastewater fund will still be making that interest. But it's just that the additional capacity that is provided to the general fund allows us to address some of these issues that you see in these other 9 strategies. And we will make sure that it doesn't affect any of the operations or capital program that is in effect in wastewater. That's part of this. So we realize we have a commitment to the ratepayers. We also have a commitment to the general fund and making sure it repays its debts. And so far, the general fund has paid 2 of the 4 years. It's just those last 2 years are sort of in a balloon situation.
I'm glad you mentioned that. As you were speaking, I was thinking of it almost as refinancing like a mortgage.
Exactly.
It's more favorable terms. It allows you to stretch out the payments. It's the same money. It's still going to be paid back, but it's done in a different format than originally envisioned or agreed to. And often it's to one's advantage to do that.
Right. So I just wanted to just make sure we're clear. These dollars will be paid back. Okay? There is no, the money's not there, we can't pay it. No, we had enough of that with Fund 9 and Fund 22 20 years ago. That's not going to happen. But what we're trying to do is give the general fund a little more flexibility to do these things that we need to do as a city to keep moving forward. Because right now, you've got a $900,000 payment, you've got an $800,000, general fund share, you've got a $600,000 pension adjustment, and who knows what else is coming down the pike. We just settled 9 of 10 labor agreements. You're going to see that bump. So we're dealing with a lot of challenges, and so we're basically asking wastewater, that fund, hey, can you give the general fund a little latitude? You'll get your money plus interest. We just need a little help. That's all. We've got a lot of things coming to a head at this particular time, and we've just got to adjust and be flexible.
Deirdre?
I think in order to move on with the strategy, you probably need a consensus that we agree to the strategy. Is that correct? Okay. So I really appreciate your perspective, Mike. Thank you for giving us the background. I remember going through that, sort of just listening as a citizen, and being curious about it and concerned. But I think, as Lorenzo, you said, it's sort of like we have a relationship with wastewater. It's sort of like you took a loan out from your parents, but they're saying, all right, you can take a couple more years to pay it off. Would we rather lose, I get it. We could lose trust with the citizens, and we're at threat of doing that anyway, but we're also at threat of cutting services early on in the fiscal year. We're sort of threatening them because earlier in the budget strategy, we're saying, well, let's already fund some of these other things. So what do we want to do if we went to everybody and said, hey, would you rather never have a resource center, never have a beach cleanup, and never have your roads paved, or take a few more years to pay off this loan? Which would you choose? I think everybody would probably agree that they'd like to see this community stick together. So I'm in favor of this budget strategy. I'd like to see, I'm curious about the 115 and how we're going to figure this out. But Mike, I applaud you and commend you, and if you want to stick to your guns, that's okay too. But everybody out there knows that you're fighting for them, and it's important that we have the history up here too, so thank you. I support this strategy.
Mary?
I too want to thank you, Mike, for your passion. It's really important that we have trust in our community, and so I really appreciated the history because I didn't know about it. However, when I was talking to Lorenzo today, and I asked if there would be any pushback, right? And you didn't seem to think that there would be, and that payments would still be made. So it seemed clear to me. So I would support it, but I really do appreciate learning about the histories.
I wonder first, I think you were here when we did this, weren't you, Lorenzo?
No, I arrived right after this budget was enacted.
No, I'm talking about when we did the loan at 14-15. You were here or not here?
I was not here. I got here in November of 14.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were here. But I do want to emphasize, I have complete trust in the numbers that Lorenzo is saying. What he says is very factual, and I appreciate his professionalism and everything, but I just have a fundamental disagreement that we made this commitment to the citizens of this town that we would pay this back in 4 installments, and go look at the videos on PCT, that this was, people did not want us to do it, they did not trust the city. You raised my water fees 18%, and now you're rating this to balance the budget, okay? And I think, I have to admit, I fully understand what Lorenzo's saying, and every point he's making is valid, but I am just going down to the core, having voted on this and making that promise to the citizens 4 years ago. I just feel really strongly about this.
So may I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So here's our situation. And I hear the term rating, and it's not rating. It's a business transaction between funds. It's when we did wastewater revenue bonds, when we issued those bonds, we committed not only to the 11,000 ratepayers, but we also committed to Wall Street that we would be using those funds for capital projects and various other things. We're still using those funds for capital projects and various other things. The payback of this loan is factored into wastewater's capital plan. We will make sure that it doesn't impact their capital plan too greatly before we, as part of this analysis. But from what I can tell from my perspective, at least right now, there will be some impact, but they will still be able to get the things done that the 11,000 ratepayers want done and that they expect to get done. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that the commitment that wastewater has made to its ratepayers and to Wall Street gets done, as well as the general fund getting some relief. So we're trying to keep both things, both entities happy. The second thing is, as far as our commitment to wastewater, we are very committed to wastewater. This is why they've received new vehicles in the last 3 years, including a $500,000 VACON machine about 3 years ago. So we are open and we are aggressively making sure that wastewater has all the assets and resources it needs. Secondly, we are in the process of doing an operational review of wastewater operations as well as public works to make sure that those ops are efficient, to make sure that those 11,000 ratepayers are getting the best service that we can offer them. So as you can see, wastewater is a priority. And so in this instance, it's not a situation where I have an issue with the term rating. I don't think it's rating because I see it as a business transaction. You run up against, you go take a 10, 15-year mortgage out, and then all of a sudden there's a balloon payment. You're going to go back to your bank and say, hey, listen, can we spread this out over another 20 years? And so we're not looking to do that, to that extent with wastewater, but it is our hope that we can reach some sort of agreement that we can stretch this out over a number of years just to give some relief to the general fund to address issues that we had no idea were coming down the pike in 2014-15. We had no idea PERS was going to drop their discount rate until 2016. And that totally caught all the cities off guard. We're not the only ones struggling with this. But this is our way, and again, this is why our bond rating keeps going higher and higher, is because we have shown a certain amount of flexibility to deal with financial complications. And so this is another example of that. And if we're able to stretch this loan out, it will be an example that I use for S&P when they come and look at how are we doing with the wastewater bonds. Because I'm still looking for the AAA rating. I'm not there yet, but that's my goal.
And
Oh, go ahead.
Sue can go next.
No,
I just wanted to say, in addition to not being able to foresee the way that PERS was going to change its discount rate, we have actually made progress, and I would hope that the budget strategies we've been discussing would have an opportunity to continue forward progress with our roads, Because what we've had is nothing but a series of deferred maintenance that, as we saw Monday night, is only going to get worse. And our pavement condition index, PCI, is going to cost us more if we aren't able to supplement the money we're getting from W, the money we're getting from SB1, et cetera. So I see this strategy as a way to allow us to do both. And I don't know if I wanted to also comment, I don't know if I can completely get behind the idea that there won't be too much pushback. I totally hear Mike. I think there'll be a ton of it. But I think that's why we're here, is
Right.
we're here to understand the specifics, make the appropriate judgments, and move on. And everyone has an opinion, but not everyone studies all the issues quite in depth and is sitting in this chair making that decision. So I think you'll put it before us and we'll make that decision.
Right. And so,
If I could just add really quickly, I don't want to put words in Councilmember Beer's mouth, but based on our conversation earlier, when she was talking about pushback, she was talking internally from wastewater. And this budget balancing is a citywide team effort, so that I don't anticipate pushback.
Wastewater is in agreement.
It's true. Yeah, that's what I
Not
was
the
talking
mic,
about.
not the mic issue that?
No.
Okay. I mean, not the mic issue, but you know what I mean, the
Whatever.
issue you brought up.
so council members, I just wanted to, I'm gonna get off the mic now.
Sue Vatalaus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The mayor wants to talk.
I'm sorry, I was
I let
looking
everybody
down.
else
Sorry,
talk.
Mayor.
Okay. One of the other things that Mike mentioned was the 1.1 million ERAF. I don't consider that excess ERAF funds because I think what they're doing is splitting it in half. So I don't think that's in excess of what we normally get. I think that's half of what we're going to get, in my own estimation.
Based on what- so-
So I don't think we can consider paying half of that out into one of these payments and making that huge difference, because I think that's going to be half of what we're going to get totally. Only just what I'm thinking.
And we'll cover that when we present the ERAF to you. The ERAF payments are composed of building blocks of payments from the past, partial payments from past years, and a partial payment from the current year. And they've shifted those blocks around. And so we'll talk about that in detail. But you have that as a measure to deal with one-time expenditures. But the thing that I just want to make sure everybody understands, we've got the pension issue. We've got this payback to the wastewater fund. And if you look at packet page 8 at the top of the sheet, you will see the impact of the labor agreements that we just implemented. And this is just 9 of the 10. There's still another bargaining unit hanging out there. You'll see that the collective 3-year cost that will be ongoing are 1.3 million. And again, that's not all of the units. So we've got all of these issues that we're trying to address with a certain level of flexibility. And it's like running any household income. You've got to figure out, all right, we've got these bills to pay, and let's figure out how to address them. And so, and I'll leave it at that.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to say is, everybody here has said what is correct. Lorenzo has, and again, I want to commend Lorenzo. He has improved the financial viability, the reporting systems. We get numbers we trust, and he has done an outstanding job as the financial person for the city of Pacifica. And it was rating was a term used by some of the members of the public, not me, okay? And I fully understand exactly what he's trying to do, and I commend him for trying to do that and change it, showing the flexibility. AAA bond rating is a great attainable goal that would save us, what, maybe 0.5% in borrowing costs? 0.75%?
It will save us some interest, and here's the key. When we go out and get more bonds, it will most likely be wastewater bonds. So if anything, we're trying to, as a city, look like we're being flexible because it eventually affects the ratings on all of our bond issuances. And since wastewater has the most fertile stream to support bond issuances, this helps them in the long run.
Right, and I fully understand what he's saying. I agree with him, and I agree with all my colleagues up here too. However, I was here, I voted for it, that would be paid back in 4 years. There's a lot of people upset about it. There's a lot of public comments. They didn't have next door then, but there was a lot of comments, you know? And I just feel, you know, I voted for a 4-year repayment, and I just feel that it's, you know, morally, I should honor that because of the history this city has in letting its citizens down and not necessarily following through. But I fully estimate it'll be a 4-1 vote, and that's fine. I have no problems with my colleagues or Lorenzo at all, not at all.
Understood.
Yeah.
But everything that we promised the ratepayers in Wall Street when we issued those last bonds, they'll get done.
And I
All right.
trust you will get that done for
Yeah,
us.
we'll make sure they get done.
Yes.
Okay.
You know, so.
Okay. One more comment.
So it sounds like we have consensus for this budget strategy, except for one. Sorry, but mad props to you for sticking to your guns.
You know.
I have one question. For the budget strategy number 2, ERAF allocation, can you just clarify for me the last sentence there? Continue to pre-allocate annual ERAF payment if and when it's received. So that would maybe be next March or April, and it would be pre-allocated as such, like we did this year for Pacifica Resource Center, PBC, and others.
Yeah, the pre-allocation is
Let it go.
Resource Center,
I realize
80,000, 83,000, Beach Coalition, 5,000, and the balance to the Disaster Accounting Fund.
Got it. Okay,
That's the
thanks.
pre-allocation. And if there were any alterations, you know, at the time when ERAF comes in, like we did this last year, we'd come back and
Yeah, if we got
and talk to
less
the council
and-
about it.
Yeah.
But the goal of that pre-allocation was to bring certainty to the Resource Center and the Beach Coalition, that as long as we do get the ERAF money, they'll get paid out of it
But we're not guaranteeing that at all until
until we
at least
receive
next
the
year.
money. Right, yeah.
So
And-
it has nothing to do with this 1.1 that'll come in August. Got it. Okay.
Correct, that's the recommendation. So that,
Oh, Mary.
that was the 10th budget strategy, so the presentation is complete, but further council discussion can occur.
Mary has a question.
Can I just make a suggestion about strategy number 5? If you could look into the Measure W funds, because there's a giant piece of it that goes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and there might be some funding for this specific piece in Measure W funds. Just a thought.
Oh. Possibility.
Yeah, we can look into that for sure.
Okay, now, public comment. This is only for items listed on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this last item? Bridget Duffy left a card with a comment, so I guess I will read that into the record. It says, "The budget, the people request that all further spending be reviewed by an independent citizen group, a People's Assembly." Okay, so now we'll move on to the consent calendar. Oh, we'll close the public hearing because no one has come forward, and we'll move on.
When that comes back for budget consideration or voting, can you structure it so I could say my piece?
You can always say your piece, Michael.
No, but, you know,
Council member, you got a microphone in front of you.
Does anyone want to make a motion on the consent calendar?
I move that we,
Comment?
oh, do we have to, oh yeah, public comment. Do we have to do public
Can
comment
I
on
pull
that?
it to make a comment?
Yes, you can pull it to make
Pull
a
it.
comment. And is there anyone in the public who would like to pull anything off the consent calendar? Seeing none, we'll come back to council.
This item is the sidewalk vendor program, and I just wanted to mention that I had sent an inquiry today about a waste fee the collection of a waste fee, and so I went back and forth and talked to Recology as well. There's an issue legally with transporting garbage across city lines, and is there a potential for us to implement a waste collection fee? So the answer to that question, Lorenzo, it was that if this becomes very popular, we can revisit this, but for now, it's probably best to leave it as is, and if and when the time comes, let's reopen that. Until then, it would take a lot more to be able to implement this, as well as with the addition of the scrutiny of the criminal aspect, or I'm not saying that right, but of the law, the state law,
Yeah.
that it's going to be more time than it's worth. So let's see how it goes and tackle it if it comes up.
Very good. Yes.
Okay.
Mary? Oh. I had that same conversation with Chris Porter about the garbage issue, and she's concerned that they will just dump the garbage into local cans, and then they'll be full, and they'll be overflowing. So she has concerns about it. Okay, anybody else? Someone want to make a motion on the consent calendar then?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
A second.
Please vote. And that passes 5-0, and we'll move on to council consideration. This is the city council goals and priority projects for fiscal year 2019 and 20. And may we have the staff report, please?
Thank you. Yes, the item before you is, sorry. The presentation was up there. It's in the middle. Yeah, there you go. Great, thank you. This item before you is the council's adoption of the fiscal year 1920 goals and priority projects, which comes out of the March 9th goal-setting session. And in preparation of this item, staff took all of the outcomes as reported from the goal-setting session and analyzed each of the priority projects recommended by the council and put some detail into the proposed scope of work for each of those and where costs have been identified related to those. We've identified those at this point, and I can run through briefly each of these. Again, I'll go over the recommended action, cover the goal-setting session, and then dive into each of the council goals and conclude with the fiscal impact. The goals, there are two halves, as the council is aware. There's the 7 value-driven goals the council identified, and then there's the priority projects for work during the fiscal year. And that's the difference between the goals and priority projects. So, again, the recommendation is to adopt city council goals and priority projects for fiscal year 1920. Just revisiting for context for the public, that the purpose of goal setting annually is really focused on setting priorities to help guide budget development and prioritization of the projects that staff will focus on throughout the fiscal year. To communicate those priorities to the public, and that's one of the important facets of annual goals adoption. An additional facet is to communicate council expectations to the city manager, who's responsible for the implementation of those goals throughout the year and the work that's going to be accomplished. And the last point made on this slide relates to the difference between goals and priority projects, which I just had mentioned. So turning to the recommended revisions to the 7 value-driven goals that were put in place several years ago. For the last couple years, they weren't revised at all, but this year the council made some minor revisions to focus these, and you see up on the slide and in your packet the track changes version showing the edits that were made at the goal-setting workshop. So the recommendation is to finalize these as is. And Mayor Vaterlos, question would be whether the council's interested in discussing or confirming that at this point, head nod at this point, or continue through the presentation and then we come back.
Is there consensus?
Yes, for me.
I mean, for me.
Would you ask?
If there was
You okay with these
consensus,
changes?
are you okay with the changes? Yes? Okay, we'll move on, thank you.
Okay.
But there is consensus.
You'll take your vote and action at the end, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So then moving into the prioritized projects, and there are 20 that are listed, and coming directly out of the goal-setting workshop, the council had identified 3 priority levels and put these projects into the priority levels. I want to comment that the priority levels, sort of the purpose of that is relative. So all of these goals, city staff will be working and very focused on making progress on all of them. One way that the priority levels helps is that if during the middle of the year there's a big project that comes onto our plate that the council directs that wasn't anticipated, I'll need to look at our priority listings here and come back to the council with a recommendation about what we're not going to be able to do compared to the new directive we got from the council. So the priority levels help with that, but it's sometimes tricky. We're not saying that, goal number 1 listed here or any of the goals listed in the first priority level in a way are much more important than the ones that are listed in the 3rd tier. So just some notes regarding the priority levels. The details in the council packet really show the scope of work and the description of these projects, and the budget and staffing we've identified related to these projects. And I won't go over in detail all of them, but I'll just touch on, and for the public, what these different goals are. Going down in order, number 1 is the continuation of the planning and design phase for the Beach Boulevard seawall and promenade replacement project. That work is continuing. We're working on funding from the state for the planning and design phase of that, and then in the future would be continuing to pursue construction funding from numerous sources. The budget and staffing related to that is that existing staffing would handle, except if we don't receive the 1.5 million that we've requested from the state in grant sources, then we don't have the funding currently identified for the planning and design of that. So, we're working on that funding source, and construction funding isn't allocated for that project. The second goal relates to the homelessness and RVs issue in town that the council discussed in 2 study sessions, or 1 study session and 1 council item last year, and was talked about at goal setting, which is to convene and participate in a Pacifica task force on homelessness and recreational vehicles, and consider task force final recommendations related to city laws, policies, property, programs, operations, or funding related to the solutions that the task force might identify to those challenges. In the budget and staffing, again, this task force formation is not really a city task force, it's a community task force that the city will participate in. I've identified that to kick off the task force, there may need to be facilitation, a facilitator for the group, and so some seed funding of $15,000 is identified for that project. Goal number 3 is to continue efforts to support affordable housing initiatives, including evaluation of developing an affordable housing impact fee. They're identified in the description of this project. We're working on housing issues and affordable housing initiatives on many fronts. And so there's numerous activities occurring. The one very specific component to this coming out of the goal-setting session was to consider and to evaluate developing the affordable housing impact fee. And to do that in the budget recommended is that's probably an estimated $60,000 for that impact fee study. Goal number 4 is, or I should say project number 4, is completing an update to the economic development plan and continuing economic development efforts. And again, recently the council approved the Economic Development Committee's work plan, and then related to economic development, the economic development manager, as well as myself and, all of us are working on numerous fronts related to hotel development, the planning efforts such as the West Sharp Park Specific Plan or Sharp Park Specific Plan also relate to economic development for revitalizing this area of town. And so there's numerous efforts underway related to economic development. The one budget item related to this goal is the $7,000 that was identified by the Economic Development Committee for some of their initiatives. Oops. Continuing on, project number 5 is related to the libraries, to continue our efforts toward construction of the new Sharp Park Library and a renovated Sanchez Library. Those efforts are continuing. The budget item specifically related to this is that anticipated election costs of up to $150,000 will be included in the budget as a placeholder, because placing a GO bond measure on the ballot in 2020 could cost up to that amount. It depends whether it's March or November of 2020. Councilmember Martin.
That's an election year, right? So we will be able to split the difference with another fund?
That's the split.
That's the split.
Difference.
Whoa.
Yeah, welcome
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah, district elections, et cetera, right?
Continuing on, Project 6,
I'm talking about.
completing Project 6, 7, and 8. This year, in this fiscal year, sort of lumped together as one goal, but the council elected to call them out separately because they are distinct studies, but interrelated, and that is Project 6, completing the comprehensive general plan update, Project 7, the Sharp Park Specific Plan, and Project 8, the local coastal plan. And these 3 projects are, concerning budget, are already funded with a consultant contract that the council approved earlier this year. So that work is continuing.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I was trying to make sure that the land use issue density and intensity, height limits, and potential for adding housing units was included, and it's right in the middle of the general plan. So, thank you.
Correct. In the description in the staff report, we specify that, and that'll continue in the work plan, as well as the work to be done.
Okay.
Great.
I have something to say. I'm not going to argue on this point, but I have to make it out loud because we're on TV. I am very disappointed in this council that one of our first-level priorities is not climate adaptation. I agreed in our goal-setting session that consensus rules and was overruled. I see that it is a level 2 priority, but if I had my druthers, I try not to suggest an issue without a solution. I would recommend that number 4, complete and update to the economic development plan and continue economic development efforts, gets pushed to that number 1 second level priority spot and replaced with, and it would get, and they would just kind of switch up. So update the climate action plan as a first level priority. I believe, and I think I said this also in the goal setting, that we, not to put you on the spot, but have an economic development manager. It is his full-time salary day job to work on this. So I don't think that it should be called out as a priority project, although I do believe in our economic sustainability and development efforts. So I just want to call that out.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the second level priorities listed here. As just mentioned, Project 9 is to complete an update to the Climate Action Plan and continue implementation of measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then specifically part of this goal coming out of the workshop was including evaluating whether to form a city climate action committee or not.
And sorry, one more thing. To that point, we were just alerted of a grant opportunity through the San Mateo County Office of the Climate Action Office of Sustainability. And if this were a top priority, it would get top priority. I understand it's a priority, but for me, if it were shown to the city of Pacifica that it was a top priority, as people are looking to us, we made national news time and time again in the last few years. We are a climate action leader, and I think we need to take our place and our seat at the table and be who we are and be able to apply for these grants. And I just want everybody to know that. But Tina's on it, so.
Can I ask a question on that? Are we prohibited from applying for grants because it's not on the priority 1 list?
No, not at all. I mean, again, going back to my introductory comment about the relative aspect of having first-tier priorities, second-tier priorities, and third-tier priorities, is that these 15, if not 20 projects would be communicated. These are the top priorities in Pacifica. We are full bore on all of these projects, in addition to all of our ongoing efforts, and we will be doing work on all of these. And to illustrate that example, you know, third level priority, Project 15, continue Esplanade Avenue Bluff erosion protection projects. We have grants that we've applied for and are receiving money through Cal OES to work on those. It's not that we're going to stop working on those. So I would in my communications about what the council's priorities are in any grant application, I would say that all of these, and any one particular, is a top priority of the city council.
Can we take out the wording, second level priorities and third level priorities? Because does that matter? That would leave us with 15 and then other priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. The council has it's you know, your prerogative to not list them into priority buckets.
Could we change number 13? Begin a strategic planning process to articulate a long-term financially and environmentally sustainable vision for Pacifica?
Ooh, I like that.
I'm sorry, which one are you referring to?
Number 13, begin a strategic planning process to articulate a long-term financially and environmentally sustainable vision for Pacifica.
The scope that relates, for this one that we described, there's components that are really focused on the financial and economic development component of this. The council certainly could, you know, expand that. I would say, and I'm speaking off the cuff here, we have a lot of focus through other projects that we're looking at concerning environmental sustainability and climate adaptation, be it our sea level rise strategies, all of that. This specific study and the strategic planning process is looking at a really detailed 5-year financial forecast, really digging into the depth of our property tax revenues and the depths of that, all of our revenue sources. It's looking at very specific economic
so it is-
development opportunity
More
sites.
Okay, so it is definitely more financially than, okay.
Well, but the component of it related to the vision, the strategic plan and vision includes the overarching value-driven goals, which includes environmental sustainability.
Right.
So,
That's why it seems inclusive, but it
Yeah.
sounds like your intent initially here is more on focusing on the financial pieces initially with regard to the property tax analysis breakdown and financial forecast?
The intent is to really capture it all, but the specific subcomponents of this are going to be us contracting with a financial expert related to property tax evaluation.
Right.
It's going to be also contracting with a facilitator to hold visioning workshops to help the council articulate that vision. And that has the environmental sustainability component. So I'm not suggesting one way or the other. We could add environmental sustainability in here. I just wanted to explain, as this was described in this report, that was the scope of it.
Sorry, Mary.
Oh, no, you're fine. So could we swap number 9 with number 5, considering that we do have a library advisory committee and the work is being done? Does it necessarily have to be where, that high up, or just a thought?
Should I continue kind of to go through the whole, and then there's these comments that are being made, and the council can discuss changes such as removing the priority levels or swapping numbers?
Okay.
Okay.
Finish, please.
Right. Item, Project 10 relates to completing the design of a renovated public plaza along Beach Boulevard. And that's the concept of taking the Beach Boulevard Plaza over here, which this year we had budgeted for sort of a re-landscaping of it and turning it more into a hardscape plus landscaping, but creating a public plaza concept there. And the 50,000 that was budgeted this fiscal year is carrying over into the, I'm sorry, I'm grabbing, the 150,000 is carrying over for the design work on that. The item 11 is evaluating the potential to expand the parking in lieu fee program, and the budget related to that, there would be existing staffing with some consultant assistance that would estimated to cost approximately $25,000. The third level priorities listed here begin with Project 12, to develop public information guidance materials about the assessment district formation process. It's a tool available for neighborhoods to decide whether it's streets paving or lighting or landscaping. They could form an assessment district, and we want to bring together educational materials about that. Project 13, we just talked a little bit about, beginning the strategic planning process to articulate long-term and financially sustainable vision for Pacifica. Project 14 is to complete the preliminary planning study for the Manor Drive overcrossing, a project that's underway. And Project 15 is to continue the Esplanade Avenue bluff erosion protection projects. The category of other priorities came out of the goal-setting session, and I organized them and just labeled them as other priorities, and includes a few smaller things that I'll explain. Item 16 is related to ongoing advocacy efforts. And as the council remembers, in goal setting, there are numerous issues that we work on in an advocacy capacity because we don't control that issue. And so an example of that would be aircraft overflight noise. And so we can continue to advocate for improvements to that. The other advocacy efforts that specifically came out of the goal-setting session are in collaboration with community and governmental partners, promoting points of historical interest, such as Adobe Sanchez, the Ohlone Portola Heritage Trail, the Ocean Shore Rail Car, historical tourism generally. Also, more specifically, continuing to support the Pacific Historical Society in efforts to restore the Ocean Shore Rail Car. The rail car was specifically mentioned during goal setting and on the list. The third advocacy effort, educating residents about wildfire safety and tracking statewide fire insurance issues and helping residents understand insurance options. And then I mentioned the aircraft overflight noise concerns. So those are all efforts that would be handled with existing staffing, and we advocate as appropriate and the opportunities arise. Project 17 related to the bike park. There were comments at the goal-setting session concerning the bike park, and what was agreed on was to begin with a study session about the bike park in discussion with Mr. Perez from Parks, Beaches, and Recreation. The scope recommended here is to actually begin with the Parks, Beaches, and Recreation Commission to get input and begin the research phase to be able to do initial research about the bike park concept and then come to a study session with the City Council. It was also mentioned to hold a study session regarding safe and sane legal fireworks, with a focus on whether or not to continue the program and the effects of continuing or discontinuing the program on the community and the city. So that's a study session, and next steps would be dependent on the study session. Now, number 19, I want to explain a little bit, and wrote about it in the report, is that the week after the goal-setting session, the council directed staff to implement a couple litter strategy pilot projects. And in evaluating the scope of those, and as I mentioned earlier, related to the budget strategy concerning limited staffing, implementing those pilot projects is quite an undertaking. So my recommendation is that this appears on this list because it's going to be a significant work product of the city in designing and implementing those pilot projects. And the additional pilot that was identified by the council, which is also significant, it relates to parking prohibition on street sweeping mornings in an area of the city that is where litter is a problem in the street. So we have to do that evaluation and design that program. So that's why this appears on the list as recommended here, even though it wasn't on the list coming out of the goal-setting session because
And
of the
just to
council
clarify, that
action.
was as it related to street sweeping. You didn't say that.
Yes, as
Yeah.
it related to street sweeping. Right, thank you. And then, remember last year, coming out of goal setting last year, there was this large list of other executive priorities. And this year, we didn't identify that tool, but in looking at this whole scope of council priority projects and looking at the scope of, the diversity of numerous priority projects staff is currently working on, my recommendation is that to capture and communicate to the public and to the council and be transparent about all of the other things we're working on, that we add this other ongoing project here, and its intention would be to list and sort of more briefly describe all of these continuing efforts that are underway. And I do have one addition to this list, if we could include that in the council's, if the council is supportive of it, to include it in this list as part of the council's action tonight, and that is the Pedro Point Coastal Trail Connection It's a project that we've been meeting with the county and the Coastal Conservancy and Caltrans about, and in drafting of this report, I didn't include that, so I'd like to add that as a
Could you say it again?
I don't-
Pedro Point Coastal
trail connection.
Trail Connection. Thank you.
So item 20 is a way of reporting out and capturing a lot of other significant work, kind of projects that staff is working on that are continuing from previous years.
And
So the one-time, I mentioned several one-time costs related to these. The total of the one-time costs at this point, and we'll explore this in more detail during the budget development process, add up to $382,000. So that would be the fiscal impact of new one-time costs. Some of these projects are already funded, various studies and such that are funded. That completes the presentation.
I have a question. I know you and I discussed this, but the Bs that came up quite a bit at our goal setting, and it's not listed, so I was...
Yeah.
It's in a bullet point on the 20.
In 20?
Number 20, yeah. It's kind of in the middle of the page. And
Okay,
I think
sorry, I missed
There
that.
was
Yeah.
even a reference to the mayor at one point in this document requesting that. I just believe I saw that somewhere else.
The Bs are captured in the project under number 20 that's titled Special Issue Evaluations and Potential Ordinances and/or Policies.
Oh, right.
And the council has directed development of an ordinance prohibiting smoking in multi-unit buildings, is continuing evaluation
Oh,
of
I
a
see
public
it.
art program initiated by the Beautification Advisory Committee, and may also consider an ordinance related to beekeeping.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed that.
A question is, two things. When you had a thing in there about the expansion of in lieu parking
Thank you.
is one of the goals or priorities. When you come back for May 7th for the fees for the city, I would like to we've been talking about this for years, and that is increasing the in lieu parking fee. We charge $3,000 for in lieu parking fee, and it costs like $30,000 for a parking space. So there's almost an incentive for the guy to go with paying the in lieu parking fee versus actually providing parking. And I'd also like to look at the affordable housing in lieu fee, because I remember Harmony One, which, 10 houses at $4 million each is a $40 million project, and they paid $340,000 in affordable housing fees. I think we need to look at both of those fees on May 7th and have discussion about that.
So, and I'll turn to Director Weremeister maybe to weigh in, or the city attorney, but I believe the parking in lieu fees would require a study to be able to evaluate
We've been
those
talking
increases.
about this for the 6 years I've been on council. I would like to finally put a fork in it and get it done, okay? Because we've been collecting $3,000 a year parking, in lieu parking fees, when everybody else is a minimum of $10,000 to $15,000.
Yeah, and so for parking in lieu, the project priority number 11 here is to evaluate that program.
Okay, well, I want to be sure it's done, and I want to be sure we have the ability to raise that fee if we so desire after we have that discussion.
Right. So I'll ask Director Weremeister, but I think the scope of this would be, what are the options for expanding that program, be it increasing the fees or expanding
Okay,
to other
and
areas
I
of the
assume
city?
that means it won't be done by May 7th.
No, we're not going to be able to evaluate the in lieu fee program by May 7th.
Is there an ETA as to when it will be done?
The specific work plan and hiring of the consultant to work on this has not been identified at this point in developing these goals. What's before the council tonight is just
And the
adoption of
affordable
these goals.
housing fee?
Now, you're talking about the BMR fee, as opposed to what's on the list here is evaluating an affordable housing impact fee, which is different from the in lieu fee.
Right.
So I'll turn to Director Waremeister in case she has anything to say.
I'm talking about both, okay, because to me, 340,000 doesn't do squat for affordable housing.
So there is a formula that's in the ordinance that was used, and I can't say, I've never studied whether or not the formula is appropriate or if it was applied appropriate when Harmony paid the fee. So we can look at that. I don't know that we'll be ready by the 7th, but I can say that part of the study that we would be doing on the impact fees will be related to the inclusionary housing ordinance, because you usually can't apply both at the same time. So we'll be coming back to you with information on how both of those programs would interact together as the community builds out.
Wait, no, I know it was determined by a formula and that everything we did was according to the rules at that time. But you know how you always hear those stories in government and sentencing and everything else that it's totally out of whack, you know. So I just want to be sure that these are a priority that we look at in the next year, because this parking is an issue in town and affordable housing is an issue in town. So I would want to be sure we deal with those.
Right, so what I'm understanding from what Director Waremeister said is that when we look at the housing impact fee and do that impact fee study, that's an opportunity to look at, because it's interrelated with our in lieu fee. So that would be the time to do that.
Right. And then in regards to this list on item 20, we had this priority-based budgeting, which has been here for quite a while. And then when Lori Tinfo was here, I think all the directors went to some sort of training on how to make the budget more user-friendly for residents to see and actually get it. ACM Lorenzo looks like he has an answer.
Well, I just wanted to give you an update. We have last year's budget. We put $30,000 in that budget in one-time funding for support of our access to the priority-based budgeting tool. And so the tool is essentially a huge database that allows us to stratify our budget by program, not by fund, not by appropriation, but by program. So we have over 200 programs citywide. And so we've done the inventory of programs, which is part of the process. We will have to now start the process of scoring and ranking those programs. And once we put a rank on those programs, they go into the tool. And then the tool becomes useful for us as far as doing the priority. So right now, I am working with the folks at Priority-Based Budgeting. I have a call actually tomorrow at, I think, 11:30, and we're going to talk about the tool and how we can make the tool more, it's already user-friendly, but we have to make sure that the data that's in there about our city and our programs properly reflect staffing, properly reflect funding, properly reflect staffing allocations. So there's some things to do. And now that we've done the budget, and part of our budget is to get staffing allocations from the departments. And so I have all that information now. And so we're making progress, and I hope I've addressed your concerns, but that $30,000 gets us access to the tool. And we hope to continue that effort, and it is my hope by the end of this budget, while we won't have use of the tool to actually help us with this budget, it is my hope that somewhere in the budget book we'll actually be able to show an inventory of programs and their funding.
Have we ever looked at some of the programs to think that maybe they're no longer needed?
Well, that's the purpose of the tool.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the purpose, because once we put a ranking on the programs, then the tool will make all of those programs very transparent to you and the members of the council and the rest of the citizens in town. And then we can start to make our own decisions based on what we see in the tool.
Okay.
But that's coming for the 2021 budget.
Okay. 19, 20, 2021, 2 years away then. 2 years away,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any more council questions, or I'll go to the public? Why don't I go to the
Inflection at the end, and it'll be a question.
public first? Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll return it to council. Mary?
I just wanted to honor the Collins family whose son was swept out to sea here in our city, and they had requested to take a look at our signage, so I'm hoping that maybe we can look at the sign inventory, because I know it was done already, so somehow we can fit that in somewhere. I don't know, maybe I can talk with Director Perez, or I'm not sure, but I just wanted to make sure that that was brought up continuously.
Yeah,
I
I
asked
can
about
comment.
that too, Mary, and I think it's going to be in the capital improvement project. There's an overall sign analysis, but to your point, I was thinking perhaps it could be, get ready for another bullet point, on item 16, packet page 27, where the advocacy efforts are listed. I mean, I'm not saying it's straight up advocacy because it might involve action, but it seemed like safety, signage, something maybe would fit there just as a placeholder while the capital improvement project evaluation is happening.
It could fit there. It could also fit in the list of other projects. If we are recommending in the CIP signage upgrades, the study and design of that would occur during the fiscal year and would, take some staff time and be publicly, what's the word?
Noticed.
Noticed, yeah, and communicated. And so it could fit in that list of projects on item 20 as well. Whatever the council's preference is, we're going to plan on doing that work.
I have a comment, or actually a request, on
Oops, everybody, sorry.
other ongoing projects on packet page 28. The second bullet point about Caltrans Highway 1 signal improvements. We list a few different streets where those intersections are. Is it possible to include Rockaway Beach Avenue along with Fassler? Because it's really both sides of that intersection that are creating some issues with regard to people coming out from Rockaway who've been surfing, when we have during commute time, and the signal exchange there in terms of the signal rotation. And I realize that's not fully in our control, but since we're already listing some of these, can we kind of make sure we're not just focusing on Fassler?
Well, that's the same intersection, right?
But it's not called Fassler on the
Right,
west
so
side.
you're just suggesting that we
I'm
say
concerned that we're only going to
Rockaway/Fassler.
focus on where we turn left up onto Fassler, and I want to make sure it's the whole impact.
The Deputy Director Bautista could elaborate, but the adaptive signal system is for Highway 1, and this is just saying at Fassler and Rockaway, that intersection.
Say Rockaway.
Crespi, Lindemar, yeah, so I'm just clarifying that you're saying, let's say Rockaway/Fassler.
Yes.
there.
Can we do that?
Yes, that can be done. Caltrans will analyze all the legs of the intersections along Highway 1.
So we'll just put that in there, and I'll be happy.
Have the intelligence signals been turned on again? Has the intelligence signals been turned on again? Because I know they were scheduled to, but.
No, they have not yet. The project with Caltrans will start in June. And when they put in the new equipment, the equipment will adaptive traffic, it usually takes it some time for it to learn the traffic patterns. So once that equipment is installed, it takes about 6 months for it to learn traffic patterns, people going left, right, and it's counting and calculates, so.
But the traffic patterns in June will be far different than they will be in September when school starts again.
Yep.
Will that have an impact on what it learns?
Yep.
Yes, all the counting, it will collect the data and will calculate, green times, left-hand turn, green times.
Right, but what I'm saying is, should it be turned on in September instead of June? Because June, there's a lot less traffic because school's out.
Well,
But September, school will be in, but they've already had 3 months of learning
right.
slower traffic and then higher volume.
Right, so when they install the equipment, they'll turn it on and it'll just continue to gather data.
Okay.
So whether you turn it on in September or you turn it on in July, it's still going to be gathering data and making sure that the signals and intersections work efficiently.
Okay.
Can we update this at our next meeting and not in goal setting?
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Can I comment now? My turn? Yeah, as a project manager, I start to cringe when we go off subject and start to get updates when we're supposed to be prioritizing our goals. So I was about to interrupt you and ask you to stop updating us, because I'd love an update on climate. Anyway, so some of my comments here, I want to say nice job. Thank you for clarifying a lot of this stuff, the ongoing advocacy efforts. I'm glad to see the Ocean Shore Railroad advocacy's in there. It's going to come up in front of us in November anyway, so we might as well add it. Thank you. And thank you for reminding us about aircraft noise, things like that. Bike park study session that goes to PB&R first. They are our subcommittee for bike and ped stuff, so they're going to do a great job. Safe and sane legal fireworks study session. The only recommendation I would say is, can we make sure that we're consulting the right people before we put together the packet? And anybody is free to make recommendations, and since I have the floor, I'm going to recommend all the schools, all the sellers, all of the people who benefit, the Fog Fest Committee, and maybe even potentially other forms of funding if Fog Fest is not that area. Pacifica Educational Foundation, Terra Nova Educational Foundation, and Pacificans Care potentially.
A lot of those people have already, we've had two reports already on fireworks from the fireworks implementation.
Those were illegal. This is about safe and sane.
No, they were on both fireworks all the same, and basically it boils down to is we have excessive amounts of overtime and payroll on July 4th.
No, I understand, and I don't want to get into the update here. I
Right.
want to talk about because we are having a study session, we already prioritized it. So I want to recommend to staff who to consult. So if you want to recommend who to consult also, instead of clarifying, because I already know all that, and I know my house is probably going to get egged too, so. So you don't have to clarify. I already know all about the funding and the police and we have to offset the costs. I get it. So we'll talk about it in the study session.
No, what I'm saying is when we had the task force,
Yeah,
all
I
those
know.
groups had representatives there.
Great, yeah.
And had input.
That's
so.
awesome. That was illegal, though. That was illegal. That was a legal
No,
task
it was
force.
legal groups there too.
No, what I'm just saying is that was an illegal task
Purpose
force.
of the task
This is
No, it was
different.
not a legal task force. It was authorized by the council.
No, it was a studying illegal
Focusing
fireworks.
on illegal fireworks. That's what she's saying.
It was focused on fireworks.
Both.
Whatever,
safe and
Chief can
It went
clarify if he
both
wants,
ways,
but
so.
PBC had a seat at that table, so. The other thing I'd like to point out is the Pedro Point Coastal Trail Connection. Thank you for remembering about that. And it reminded me that The Coastal Trail is part of the OSPAC, the Open Space Advisory Committee's purview, and they just submitted a request for funding for approximately $4,000, and that was to improve the signage versus replacing it. So the suggestion was for PB&R to include that in their capital improvement plan or something like that. I don't know, but I just wanted to bring that up here because we are talking about finances and we are talking about coming back on May 7th with that. And Director Perez probably heard that, but if not, he can read it in the minutes. And then the last thing was, in a similar vein, there was a recommendation, and it's come up a few times in the past few years, to increase the non-resident swim fee at the Jean Brink pool. Daly City charges almost 3 times that. I can tell you from firsthand, space is limited down there, so not that it would make that much of a difference financially, but we should probably be making a few bucks on those folks who are coming down from Daly City and using our pool. And then I'm also open to hearing discussions on maybe removing the first, second, third level priorities, and then hearing your suggestions for moving things around. That's it.
Sue?
Well, I support your suggestion, Mayor Vaterlos, about removing the designations of first level, second level, et cetera. I would like to say that while I appreciate all these are going to get done, there is a certain element of which one's listed first, which one's listed second. And so I guess I'm not really clear on the park area at where the berm is, how far along that project is relative, like, is it halfway done? Are we in the middle of that versus the bike park, by which you're just beginning, right? So in other words, the money that was assigned was carried over, am I right? On the plaza area? I forgot what number it is.
Yeah, this fiscal year, the council appropriated $150,000
Right.
for that project, and the design contract, have we signed a contract yet, or it's Deputy Director Batista can provide the update on that?
So currently for the Plaza project, my project manager is getting quotes from landscape architects at the moment. So he's taking them out to the site to make sure that they see what it looks like and give us a proposal to give us design or a conceptual. So that's where we're at now.
Okay, and was there also a grant, some kind of grant thing with PB&R for the outdoor gym?
Yeah, right. There is a grant, I think it's around $30,000 related to an outdoor gym that could become part of the program adjacent to that plaza or park.
So I guess maybe I'm making it unclear, but I want to understand, because that sounds like a PB&R related service or activity as well as Public Works, and so does the bike park. But the bike park just came up, so is that a lower priority item? Is it equal? Are we moving forward with both? That's my question.
Well, I would say it's lower priority because the work on the Beach Boulevard Park, is already funded, and
Okay.
In the process, and the bike park, the direction from the council was to sort of initiate the study of issues related to the bike park and eventually coming to council in a study session for further direction at that point. And Director Perez can talk about all the variables related to skate parks and bike parks and such, but, location, money for ongoing maintenance, money for building, et cetera. And location is probably a
Number
very
one.
critical one.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
No?
anyone else agree on the first, second, and third? Just removing those headings and leaving it a straight 15?
Oh, yes, I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree.
We did talk about maybe swapping some things, but did we want to talk about that a little bit? Maybe swapping number 9 for number 5?
If we eliminate the categories, it really doesn't matter.
Okay,
Yep.
very good.
And if I could clarify regarding eliminating categories, do we want to keep the other priorities
Right.
category
Just
in
the
there?
first,
Yeah.
second, and third,
Okay.
up to item 15, and then the others are others.
And if the council could just make that as part of the motion, that change as part of the motion, that would be great.
Okay. Did I ask for public comment on this? Yes, I did. Okay, so does someone want to make a motion?
And just to clarify, we'd be, the motion would need to include the removal of the headings first, second, and third level priorities, and adding the Pedro Point
Yes.
item.
And the
to-
word Rockaway.
I'm sorry?
And the word Rockaway to the Fassler Rockaway traffic item.
Right, adding the word Rockaway to the bullet point under 20 with the title Caltrans Highway Signal Improvements.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion. Can I make a motion as per city attorney's statements, or should I call it out? I'll make a motion to approve the goals adoption, and under prioritized projects, remove first, second, and third level priority labels, keep other priorities, add the word Rockaway to the Highway 1 improvements for InSync, and add under other priorities, Pedro Point Coastal Trail Connection. Did I get that?
I'll second.
Please vote. And that passes 5-0, and we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have our work cut out.
And it's not in, it's a Caltrans.
Don't forget your charger, Michael.